Hey there, it's Jake Dempsey, CEO and co-founder of Project Broadcast. In this video, we're going to make sure everyone understands consent as it relates to text messaging. Now, text messaging consent is required. It is mandatory. I want to, out of the gate, make sure that is said from the start. You should not be texting people that have not provided you consent to send them a text message. We're going to spend some time talking about consent, what it is, how to capture it, and how to make sure you stay compliant with the texting guidelines that have been set forth by the various trade associations and bodies inside the telco space. I'll also let you know that there's a trade association called the CTIA. The CTIA actually provides a document called the CTIA guidelines, and you can Google for this document. I'll put a link to the document in the video's description. But this document goes over basically best practices for the telco industry. And then the telco industry, meaning the carriers, Sprint, Verizon, AT&T, and all the various intermediate carriers inside that telco network, leverage those guidelines to develop their own processes and strategies to adhere to them. Every carrier does something slightly different. But what's important is to understand that the CTIA has provided texting guidelines that businesses should adhere to. And we'll talk about what some of those things are as we go through talking about crafting messages in Project Broadcast, how to ensure you have opt-out and brand information in your messaging. But before we do any of that, we're going to talk about consent. And that consent is mandatory. I'll probably say that 10 times today. Remember, you can always go to training.projectbroadcast.com to get additional training. There are tons of training modules available. And you could also always email support@projectbroadcast.com for any questions you might have about your account or features as you leverage Project Broadcast. So we learned in previous videos what the TCR was, what A to P was, what 10DLC messaging was. So you should be up to speed on understanding that there's compliance that we have to adhere to in the texting space. We have to get a phone number provisioned. We have to go through a registration process with the campaign registry for your number to let you be allowed to send text messages to the customers of telephone providers. When we're talking about consent, consent is permission. It is the permission to send text messages to a prospect or to a customer. A very common question we get by people in Project Broadcast who sign up and create their account is, I've got a business, it's an existing business, and I want to make sure those people know that I've got a new texting phone number. What do I do in Project Broadcast? So again, there's a very specific type of relationship called an existing business relationship when talking about consent in text marketing. We typically suggest you do not go back more than 12 to 18 months in your previous interactions with customers to send them a message that you've got a new texting phone number. Here's kind of the important thing to think about. If you have an existing business relationship with a contact, you are allowed to send them a text message that is information only, and I can't stress that enough. You'll hear two types of messaging, information only and commercial. Information only messaging means I'm going to send a message to someone. It has nothing to do with them buying or purchasing any type of thing. That's information only. It becomes a commercial message anytime you put any kind of information in there about a sale, a promo, a coupon, or something, that creates some type of purchase intent for the customer. So let's pretend I've owned a business for 10 years and I've been collecting information on my customers as they've come in and done business with me, and I've got a massive database of existing business relationships. Well, when you bring those existing business relationships into Project Broadcast, our suggestion is that you do not import anyone that you have not had any type of business relationship with, except for the people that you've worked with in the last 12 to 18 months. People that have not worked with you in your business 18 months or more ago, you don't want to import them and send them a message because the likelihood that that's potentially not their phone number or they don't want to do business with you anymore is just higher. Consent is about risk mitigation. What we're trying to prevent is an increase in the stop responses we get from our contacts. And we're also trying to prevent the number of people that might mark our message as spam. So if you think about again, in my fictitious business that I've been running for 10 years, if I were to send a text message to someone that I did business with 8 years ago, the likelihood that they're going to say, stop or report my message as spam is actually much higher than someone I did business with yesterday. So our solution, our guidance here is don't go more than 12 to 18 months back in your customer database to import those into Project Broadcast. And the very first message you're going to send to them is going to have some very key pieces of information in it. One, it's going to identify who you are. So again, I'm Jake with Project Broadcast. I want to make sure in my message, I very clearly say, hey there, it's Jake with Project Broadcast. I've clearly identified myself. I'm then going to include information only, not commercial information. So I may say something to the effect of, hey, this is my new business texting number, and give them the phone number. Please store it in your contacts. And if you ever have any questions, I'm always here to help. So I've expressly given them some information. And at the end of that message, I'm going to be sure to make sure to say something to the effect of, hey, if you're not interested in receiving text messages from me, just reply stop to opt out. Now, you're allowed to use different language when it comes to that opt-out language, but it has to be very clear call to action that allows the person to reply stop to unsubscribe, reply stop to stop, something to that effect. So the three main components of that information-only message is identify who you are, make sure the content of the message is information only, and ensure you've got opt-out language in that message. That's for existing business relationships, okay? Now, let's talk about non-existing business relationships. Let's talk about prospecting for a moment. There are multiple ways to capture consent when it comes to text messaging. And remember, just so we're all on the same page, consent is mandatory. It's not an option to get permission to send people a text message. You want to make sure you've captured consent. And if you don't capture consent, here's what can happen. There are bodies such as the TCPA, and I forget the name of the one that's in Canada, but for the US, it's called the TCPA. And if you send text messages to people who don't want them, ultimately they can report you to these entities like the TCPA. And the TCPA can research whether or not you captured consent from that contact. And if not, you can be fined by the TCPA per incident, per message that you've sent to a contact. So you want to make sure you don't take consent lightly. It is something you need to make sure you incorporate into your business strategy, that you've captured consent from your recipients, from your contacts, customers, prospects, to have permission to send them text messaging, okay? Now, we've talked about existing business relationships. You're only going to go back 12 to 18 months at most and import those contacts into Project Broadcast to send them your information-only message with no commercial content, making sure to identify who you are, only use informational messaging that says something to the effect of, this is my new business texting number. If you have questions, I'm here to help type of message. And clear opt-out language with a clear call to action. Super important. Now, for new people, there are other ways to get consent. You may have a Jot form or a Google form, or use another tool like ClickFunnels to collect opt-in information. Here's what's important to know about consent. You have to have it. Now, you don't have to capture it through Project Broadcast explicitly. You may capture it through one of these other mechanisms like a Google form, a Jot form, ClickFunnels, or maybe you do vendor events and you capture contact information on a clipboard even. What's super important, though, is that you maintain how, where, and when you captured that consent by your contacts. Now, what we do at Project Broadcast is we try to educate people that the best way to capture consent is what we call in-platform, meaning literally inside of Project Broadcast. Because if you show that the person has reached out to you first, you've set up a keyword in Project Broadcast, maybe it's called VIP, and someone texts you the word VIP, and they've never texted you before, they have initiated the interaction with you. So if they've initiated the interaction with you and you have a keyword, and we'll talk about keywords in another video, but at the end of the day, a keyword is just a word or phrase someone can text you that makes things happen in Project Broadcast. So if I've got this VIP keyword set up and someone texts me the word VIP and they've never been in my Project Broadcast is going to automatically create a contact. It's now got a history that that person has reached out to you first. And what you should do in your keyword response is to make sure you identify who you are. That message can have commercial information because they've texted you first. And you want to clear opt-out that's available for them to reply stop to unsubscribe. Now, when using Project Broadcast, you're going to get to learn about dynamic fields in a few videos from now. And we even have a dynamic field called opt-out that you can include that will automatically insert the text, reply stop to unsubscribe. And even if you don't like that text, there's an area in Project Broadcast I'll show you when we get to the opt-out video and talk about opt-out, where you can change that text to be anything you want that's more suiting to kind of your language. Again, the most important thing to realize is consent's mandatory. You got to have permission to text people. If you're blindly importing contacts into Project Broadcast and sending them text messages, you have not captured consent and you are not in compliance with the CTIA and the TCPA's guidelines on texting. Make sure you capture consent. Make sure you only go as far back as 12 to 18 months of existing business relationships to send them an information-only message that has who you are, information-only content, and opt-out language. And for new people who aren't in your existing business relationship list, it's always a good idea from a prospecting viewpoint. If you're creating campaigns in Project Broadcast or keywords in Project Broadcast, you want to make sure you provide opt-out language on occasion. It does not have to be in every message that you send. That the CTIA guidelines don't say that it has to be in every message. But what I typically like to kind of encourage is that if you're doing prospecting and you're hoping that people that aren't in your contact list are messaging you to kind of be added to your funnel, make sure that that keyword includes opt-out language. And if you have a campaign that maybe they get dropped into, and that campaign is prospecting in nature, in the first message of the campaign, make sure to put it there as well. That way you provided ample opportunity for the recipient to reply stop to stop getting messages from you. And then on occasion, make sure to include opt-out language in your messaging so that your recipients know how to opt out from receiving messages. Now, if someone replies with a couple keywords, like stop, unsubscribe, quit all, there's a few of them. If someone responds with the word stop, Project Broadcast will automatically mark that recipient, that contact, as do not message in Project Broadcast so that you don't have to worry about it. Now, it's possible that they send something not as specific as stop. Maybe they say something like, hey, Jake, always loved connecting with you, but not interested in getting any text messages. Let's just pretend that's the message that someone sent me. Well, in that case, it didn't trigger the automatic built-in stop keyword. So you can go to the contact details and actually just mark that contact as do not message so that you don't send them message. And again, the main thing we're trying to do here is mitigate the risk of receiving too many stop responses from our recipients or receiving too many marked as junk messages that happen on their phone. And the reason we do that is if you get too many stop responses, you can actually be blocked by the telcos in the telco network because your stop responses are too high. In addition to that, if you have a lot of messages that are reported as junk from someone's phone after they get the message, that also can cause you to get blocked. So what we're trying to do is mitigate getting stops and marked as junks and marked as, bad messages so that our messaging deliverability is high. And the further we go back in existing business relationships, the higher the risk. So 12 to 18 months seem to be kind of a safe zone for existing business relationships. And for new people messaging you, it's always just a great idea to make sure in your initial keyword and or your prospecting campaigns, you provide clear opt-out language in those messages as well, which is similar to the example messages that you provided to the TCR as a part of your registration process. So we want to make sure that we adhere to the idea that consent is mandatory, and we want to only go back 12 to 18 months on existing business relationships. And on new relationships, new contacts that get created in Project Broadcast, make sure we're telling them who we are, what we're going to message them about, and how they can opt out of receiving those messages. If you follow those basic strategies, you'll have compliance wrapped up and you'll be in good shape to make sure that you've got the proper consent to send text messages to your audience.